Pac is back. Well, no, not really, but maybe the Pac-12 is better than it's been for the past few years. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down the conferences. This is an exercise we, of course, for you old-timers, we do each and every off-season in which we go through all the results of the games between the Power 5 conferences, and we seed the conferences, and we go through the games, and we put them into context, and we put a metric to it, and it's a whole big ordeal, and it's just unbelievable. So we're not going to do that here, but we're going to look at the results of the conferences. So about 80% of the games have been played, non-conference games, in the regular season. So it's about time that we just kind of look at things and see how they stack up. We rated the ACC. That was easy to do. Now let's look at the Pac-12. So what's really happened this season in the Pac-12? Well, the Pac-12 is 5-4 against the other four conferences, the other four major conferences. But the Pac-12 is only 9-6 against the group of five. That's 4 losses to the Mountain West. That's 2 losses against the American Conference. I'm looking at you, UCLA. All right, against the current top 25, the Pac-12 is 0-3. So those are games in which, of course, Oregon lost to Auburn. Stanford lost to UCF. And the other loss would be, of course, UCLA getting blasted last weekend against Oklahoma. Keep in mind that Arizona State would have a win against the top 25 because they beat a top 25 team in Michigan State who was 2-0, but they knocked them out of the top 25. So you have to take that into consideration as well when we see metrics like this team or this conference is such and such against the top 25. Well, many times their wins or losses either catapulted certain teams into the top 25 or knocked them out of the top 25. So again, Arizona State would have a top 25 win, but they knocked Michigan State out of the top 25. Not the top 25 that actually makes sense, but, you know, the AP top 25. So that's a bit shaky. 9-6 against a group of 5. As you can see, the other conferences faring much better. Again, check out our ACC video. Against the current top 25 at 0-3. Okay, the big games have been Stanford taking on UCF and Northwestern. And you who watch me on a regular basis know that I have applauded Stanford for their non-conference schedule this year in particular, but really most years, taking on UCF, Northwestern, and Notre Dame in the non-conference. That's pretty substantial. Well, they got blasted by UCF. They did beat Northwestern. We'll see how good the Wildcats will be this season. Oregon lost a tough one to Auburn. That's the marquee game of the conference this far into the season. This is the game that put the Pac-12 behind the 8 ball once again, as did the Washington loss to Auburn last year in terms of a college football playoff. Right now we're looking at Utah in the South, possibly Arizona State. And I'm not saying that these teams are college football playoff worthy. I'm not saying they're talented enough, good enough, but in terms of the metrics of the wins and losses to date, they're undefeated. Washington State in the North, but Washington's already lost. Stanford's lost a couple times. Of course, you got Washington State. You got Cal at 3-0. So in terms of the big games, those have been the big games. The Stanford games against UCF and Northwestern. Of course, Oregon, Auburn, the biggest game to date, non-conference. And Colorado with a big win against Nebraska, a team that is supposed to contend in the Big Ten Western Division and was actually picked by most to win that division. And Colorado got the win at home, but then they turned around and lost to a group of 5 in Air Force. UCLA's been a dumpster fire, and they've really brought down the league in losing to Oklahoma, San Diego State, and Cincinnati. So they have 2 group of 5 losses. The Mountain West has been very competitive, and I'm being kind, very competitive against the Pac-12 in recent years, even against good Stanford teams. San Diego State won. They beat Arizona State last year. Those teams, Fresno State and San Diego State in particular, of course, Boise State over the past 10 to 15 years have been difficult for the Pac-12 on the field. All right. What's left for the Pac-12 right now is 2 games against Notre Dame that aren't nearly as important as they might have been a week ago or so. USC goes out to BYU, and they lost. And so that's a big loss for the Pac-12 right there, and USC plays Notre Dame later. Stanford's already lost 2 games. They're looking like a 6 or 7 win team, and they play Notre Dame and that's not going to matter for Stanford or the Pac-12 at that point. Cal plays Ole Miss coming up in Oxford this weekend, and if Cal, not that Ole Miss is going to be a notch in the belt necessarily in terms of a big win, but it is versus the SEC, and Cal's looking to go to 4-0 as about a pick'em game right now against Ole Miss. Washington, they've already lost to Cal. They really have no big non-conference games this year. They play BYU, and that's later. Other games of note, of course, we mentioned the BYU game against USC and the Trojans going down in overtime on the road. Utah did beat BYU by 18 points. The best win possibly on the board right now for the Pac-12 is Arizona State going to Michigan State and winning. Other than that, Arizona got a decent win against the Big 12 in Texas Tech over the weekend. Arizona, of course, lost to Hawaii earlier. Again, we mentioned the perils of UCLA. Oregon State's never going to help out the Pac-12 in any kind of conference comparisons. They've already lost to Hawaii and Oklahoma State. Washington State got a decent win on the road against Houston, although you would expect Washington State, being one of the better teams in the Pac-12, actually had the best record in the conference last year at 11-2 to go on the road and beat Houston, who's a upper echelon group of 5, but not at the very top of the list. So that's what we've got so far in the Pac-12. A decent showing, not embarrassing, not horrible, but again, UCLA's been awful. Colorado loses to Air Force after they beat Nebraska. Washington's already lost, but they lost in conference. But that necessarily, unless Cal's going to go on a run and possibly vie for a college football playoff appearance, that was not a good loss for the Pac-12 in conference. And then, of course, the Oregon loss to Auburn was huge. That's where we stand in the Pac-12. It's better than the ACC. It's not even comparable. But in terms of the college football playoff, Clemson, of course, all by themselves keeps the ACC relevant. And really, right now, the Pac-12 is not relevant at all in terms of the college football playoff. They need help, or they need one of these teams that we don't expect to go on a roll and go undefeated or finish with one loss, a decent-looking loss, Arizona State, Utah, Washington State, Cal, one of those teams to keep it up, and that's not going to happen. This conference is too deep with decent teams. They're going to beat each other up. I would expect the conference champion to have at least 2 losses, as I predicted in my preseason predictions with Utah defeating Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. Or was it Oregon over Utah? I think it was Utah over Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. Your thoughts on the Pac-12? Who's got a shot to make a college football playoff? Who's the best team in the Pac-12? And how does it stack up against the other conferences? Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Get your weekly predictions. Go down to the description section below. Grab the link next to Voice of College Football Community. Get your weekly predictions right there. 44-28 against the spread thus far this season. And that's predicting all the top 25 games plus some more games of note. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.